My name is Alana Blumenthal, and I am the director of the Brigham City Museums, where we are opening the Black Veterans of Utah exhibit, which we'll be hosting in our Community Spotlight Gallery from now and through until January 28th. We are also very fortunate to be able to announce tonight that part of that exhibit is, for the first time and only time on public display, we have two original 1919 photos of the Buffalo soldiers returning home from France. Well, we just learned about that, and they are private programs, and they are going to be scanned and retired in the future. So if you want to see those, come to visit the museum. We are open Tuesdays through Fridays, 10 to 5, Saturdays 1 to 5. And we're here in Brigham City, so come say hi. And with that, I will introduce our first guest tonight. Robert Burch is Executive Director of Samahadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, a nonprofit researching African American history in Utah and the Mountain West. Robert began his career in the United States Navy, where he served 4 years. He had tours of duty in the Caribbean, South America, the North Atlantic, and the Mediterranean Ocean. He received the Navy Expeditionary Cross for service as part of the U.S. peacekeeping force in the Mediterranean. His professional life has been varied, focused primarily on sales and customer service, including 4 years in food safety and corporate compliance. His volunteer career includes Utah Chapter President and National Board member of the Society, Charter Board member of Sons and Daughters of the Utah State's Middle Passage, and member of the Utah Juneteenth Committee. And with that, I will hand it over to my friend Robert.
Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate Alana and inviting us out. We've been working on Black history and genealogy here in Utah for a number of years. And we're happy to finally get to the point where we can start sharing some of the things that we are finding in Utah, especially some of the great historical things that Utah has to share, particularly about veterans and servicemen here in Utah that go all the way back to the founding, the historic founding of Utah as a territory and as a state. So African Americans have been here prior to and as long as there's been settlements here in Utah, particularly starting in Salt Lake Valley and spreading out amongst the state of Utah. Now, Alana told a little bit about myself. I am the Executive Director of Samahadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, and we founded this foundation because as we helped folks do their genealogy, we were still getting the feedback that there's no Black history in Utah. And our response would always be the same, like, sure it is, because we just helping this family with their genealogy, and we're finding folks back to 1847. So we know that African Americans here were here from the start. And especially if you're a Latter-day Saint, for the first settlers in the Salt Lake Valley, the first 4 men to go into the Salt Lake Valley, 3 of those Latter-day Saints were African American. So we know that African Americans have been here prior to settlement and since settlement here in Utah. I also serve on the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, which is a nationwide organization of folk who research family histories all over the country and in the Caribbean. That organization is 43 years old, has 38 chapters nationwide, about 3,000 members. And I'm also the vice president now of Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage, which studies, if you know anything about the Middle Passage, the triangle and slave becoming areas of Portugal and the Iberian coast down to Angola, over to Brazil, where 80% of all Africans that were taken into slavery were taken to up into the Caribbean and to the United United States. That particular triangle is called the Middle Passage. And in that passage, we believe it's somewhat close to maybe 5 million enslaved Africans were dispersed around the world. One of the biggest things for me, being in the military, when I came into the Navy, it was a completely, utterly different experience for me. I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, and in my neighborhood, it was all black. So that meant the elementary school I went to was all black. The high school I went to was all black. And then after I left high school, the college I went to was a historical black college. So when I joined the military, that was literally a change of culture and a change of experience for me. I went from everybody being black to most everybody being white. And so going into the Navy and seeing faces that I've never seen before, which included Japanese and Chinese and Native Americans and other people from all over the world that served in the United States military. The United States military also provided me something that I believe changed how I perceive myself and my community for the rest of my life. And what I mean by that is this. I come from a culture in the United States that's centered around South Carolina and Georgia. That area, particularly through Charleston, 50% of all slaves that came into the United States came through Charleston, South Carolina. They came from a continent where most of the people there had different languages and also different cultures. In that particular area of Africa, there was probably 1,000 different languages and hundreds of different cultures. When they arrived into South Carolina, they now have to learn how to talk to themselves because they're all speaking in different languages, and they created what is called the Gullah language. And once they worked on one side of creating a language to communicate amongst themselves, they also created a second language, a pidgin language, to communicate to the Europeans, the slaveholders. And so we call that area from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, down into Florida, the Gullah Geechee corridor. And the Gullah Geechee corridor is a unique African-American culture, which is different from the African-American culture found around Louisiana and Mississippi, that's more focused on French and Native Americans, and from the Northeast, where most of the free people were. So I come out of a very unique culture. And unfortunately, for us to try to help one another and our children succeed, we had to learn to reject that culture. And so I grew up in an environment that said the way I looked, the way I spoke, the food I ate was bad, and they literally taught us that right through college. So joining the Navy gave me an opportunity to go around the world and see all of these different cultures from the Caribbeans, all the different cultures around South America, all of the different cultures in Europe. So by the time I arrived back in Decatur, Georgia, I was all right with myself because I realized that each and every place that I stopped was distinct and different in itself, and all of those people loved the culture that they was coming from. So when I got back home, I realized my experience in Decatur, Georgia was distinct and separate from every other culture in the world. And so the Navy allowed me to understand that. It changed my way of thinking for the rest of my life. And started to go down the road of studying the culture that I was from and the things and the ways that we did things. So the military gave me that particular benefit. Now, some other people have gained a lot of different benefits from serving in the military. And even as, for example, with my family, from the generation that I am from, we had a lot of folk who, within a 20-year span that I was related to, who served in the military. Myself and my cousin Rufus, we served in the United States Navy. My brother and my nephew served in the United States Marine Corps. I have two cousins who were twins who both went into the Army together. And I have a cousin, Terry and Velma, who both went into the Air Force. So within that 20-year time period, all of these cousins and nephews and sons and stuff, we all participated in military service. So the military is very important to my family. But what I would like to do before I talk about some of the information we want to share about some of the veterans we have today is I'm going to introduce Miss Adrienne Scott-Ellis, and she's going to take the time to talk to you about her Utah family and the great many of servicemen in her family who have served our nation and protected it over the years. So for a number of different wars, a number of different times. So I'm going to introduce to you Miss Adrienne Scott-Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. This is a wonderful honor to be here tonight and to share information about my family. Now, I have to say, Robert did not prepare me for this event properly because he made it sound as though I'm really going to go into details about my family's military service. I'm going to tell you more about my journey of just putting the pieces together of my family. So I am a native-born Utah, and often just because I'm Black, people make the assumption, you know, where are you from? You can't be from Utah. So oftentimes I am saying and explaining to individuals, I am from Utah and we have deep roots here in Utah. Not just from my father's side, but also from my mother's side. And so the predominant name is the Hills and the Scotts. And as a child, all I'd have to say is I'm a Scot, and my history kind of was given to me. Oh, you're related to so-and-so, your grandfather is this, and I would get these little tidbits of information. Well, I really didn't appreciate that history as a child, and looking around in Utah, I was looking for people that looked like me that were not related to me, especially when I was of dating age. And unfortunately, there was a couple of times that I ended up dating cousins. So I have to admit that I truly had a misconception of the world being raised in Utah, because the Black people that I did see, they were my family members. And my father, he was a hunter, a camper, a fisherman. And so we were traveling to Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. So I'm thinking I'm world traveled, right? But these are the places that I'm traveling to and seeing more of the same of what I'm seeing in Utah. So there was a time in my life that I really thought that I was going to have to travel to Africa in order to find a husband. Misconceptions, right? Well, my journey with Simahaditi kind of was a misconception, was a catalyst. So I'm an educator. I taught for 30 years in the Davis School District. And we had the incident at Charlottesville. We had Colin Kaepernick and the reaction to that, taking a knee. And a lot of the misconceptions came to the surface, that this idea that Black people were not patriotic, that Black people didn't serve in the military. I was baffled, like, how in the world are they not understanding that, you know, we probably were the higher percentage that served in the military. And so I started thinking, okay, how am I going to have to how can I start to clear up this misconception with my students? Because I know it was some of their parents that were expressing this misconception to them. So I took it upon myself, we're going to have a project. It was close to Veterans Day, and so you need to do some research, go ask, find out who are your family members that served in the military. If you can, bring pictures, bring copies of pictures, you can bring a little story, but we're gonna have an opportunity to share so we can understand, you know, who in our family have served. And I did that, and I just was dumbfounded with the numbers, because it just, so-and-so served in the military, so-and-so served in the military. Really? Really? And so then I had to start asking the question, why didn't I know that? Why didn't you tell me about that? And then information started to come up of the difficulties, that it was a kind of tug of war with so proud to be serving this country. And, you know, depending on whatever war they would talk about, you know, all their accomplishments. But then they would have these stories of coming back and just the mistreatment, the injustice. And even between my two families of the Scott and the Hills, there's a difference in the utilization of those benefits that they should have received. And it was interesting that even today I can see economic differences based on those military men that served, and I have women as well that served. If they were more aggressive, if they had prior education of how to navigate the system, how much better off they ended up being economically. Just the contributions. I've always been proud that they have served, but then there's also kind of a stigma, and it kind of depends on the time period. There were moments where it's like, so proud that, you know, I have so many members that served in the military, and then there were times where there was that stigma, like, you've given your life, you've been used, you're being abused, why would you give yourself like that to this country who mistreats you? And so there was always that reconciling with that. And I know that many of the people that I have talked to because of this project, there's a love for the principle. There's a love for the ideals. There's a love of the concept, freedom and justice for all. And that is worth fighting for. And so when you break it down like that, they all say, I am so proud to be a veteran, and I would encourage any young person to serve their country, because together we're going to meet those ideals, but it's going to take education. It is going to take willingness to speak the truth, even though the truth is painful. And as my experience as an educator, we have come to a place in time where it is painful, but we're not willing to move forward through that pain and get past the pain so that we can get to the prize at the end. And so I feel this organization, these opportunities, helps in that healing process of pushing through the pain, speaking the truth, and helping to begin the healing process. So Robert, I don't know if that was anything of what you were expecting.
That's great. Make me want to cry over here. Because it's beautiful. And so we hope that folks can come out and look at some of these exhibits and meet some of the Scott and Hill family that are posted on the wall out here, and and look at their profiles and learn
Yeah.
about
This
your
is
family. And
what I was able to put together, for this display. It's just a tiny piece of the iceberg, but I'm hoping that more family members see,
Yes.
just how inspirational this is for others and a chance to tell our story, tell our narrative, and it's gonna grow.
Right. And these are just small examples of the panels that you see when you come out here to the museum, because on this particular exhibit, and Adrienne didn't say this, but her dad is on there, her granddad is on there, and who else?
I have an uncle, I have my stepfather,
Oh, your husband.
my husband.
So this is a great Utah
Yes.
family with a history of military service.
And my husband, sorry to interrupt, but my husband, all of his brothers served in the military. So
Wow.
he served in the Air Force. He has his brother Tommy that served in the Marines. Timmy, Navy. No, I'm probably messing this up, but they're all in the different branches of military service, but all of them veterans. Yeah.
Just spread out to all the different branches. I actually didn't discover my cousin Ruth was in the Navy till one day my ship pulled up along his ship. I'm like, I know that guy. that's what I thought that my cousin Ruth was in the Navy. We just happened to be in Norfolk, Virginia at the same time. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's great to see an entire family like this who's are from Utah and who served our country and live here in Utah.
Not necessarily from Utah, some of the members, but at least connected to Utah. So and it's ever expanding. Just like the story you shared, I've got my uncles, my great uncles, who there's like 5 of them that served in the military, and they too have a story where they were, I want to say Vietnam, together, and they were able to connect there.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing it. And so I can share some more things real quick.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. And so we have quite a number of photos out there, profiles, I should say, actually, that have some connections, where folks have connections to each other. One of the ones I really like to talk about and tell folks about is this group of leaders here. These are actually leaders of Hill Air Force Base, African American leaders. On here, you have Miss Janice Carroll. She is the first woman to ever serve as a commander of Hill Air Force Base. She recently left that post maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And so when you go through the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Army, there are very few women who will ever hold a command position that she has held here at Hill Air Force Base. Also in that group of leadership from Hill Air Force Base is the first African American who served as the commander of Hill Air Force Base, and that is General Lester Wiles. Then here we have the second commander, African American commander of Hill, third African American commander of Hill, fourth African American commander of Hill, and the fifth. So there have been 5 black commanders of Hill Air Force Base. And the gentleman on the bottom right over here, come and take a look at the profile. He is actually the ranking enlisted man of the base. So the military is set up pretty much like businesses, executives, and labor. That's the easiest way for people to remember it. So the commissioned officers are the executives, and these 5 would be the executives of the base. But this is the ranking labor leader of the entire base. And that base, if I remember correctly, has several thousand men and women working at it, and he is responsible for all of that military side of it. So I really like to share that Utah has given some great opportunities for leadership here in this state for people who are working to move up through the ranks of command And they've been able to do that here in Utah. And actually, there have been men who've been able to do that in Utah well before these folk. And they are a part of our early military in Utah. Many of us refer to them as the Buffalo Soldiers. The narrative goes that that name was given to the African American soldiers because of their hair and the ferociousness of the fighters. And understanding that when these men were coming from Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama, these were men who were not just fighting for their country, but these were men who often had to fight to prove that they were worthy. And for many times, for many of them, it was either do well or leave, die or get out. It was just, it's literally that simple for them. So those guys tended to be very, very, very motivated, is the word I'm looking for. They're not in a position where they can say no and understanding their status in America and where their history comes from. So it literally meant for them to fight hard. But the gentleman here in the center is formerly Colonel Charles Young. He was the third African American to graduate from West Point. He served at Fort Duchesne in the Uinta Basin during the Indian Wars. And so he was the only black commissioned officer at Fort Duchesne at the time. And so he was the commander of the Buffalo Soldiers. Duchesne at the time, Fort Duchesne at the time had a mix of black soldiers who were infantry and white soldiers who tended to be more cavalry that were serving out of Fort Duchesne. That fort is no longer there now. Once they started transferring men over to Fort Douglas, the Buffalo Soldiers took that fort down. But in that Uinta Basin on 9 Mile Cane is still the rock road that they built into Fort Duchesne. And this gentleman is Alan Allensworth, probably one of the most prominent black men in American history. Somehow we lose him in history, but I would rank right up there in social status and service to the U.S. community as I would rank Frederick Douglass or even Martin Luther King Jr. This gentleman did a lot. He was actually the chaplain over at Fort Douglass when the soldiers left Fort Duchesne and they brought them over into Fort Douglass just before the starting of the Spanish-American War. And one particular story that I want to share about Buffalo Soldiers in Utah is a story that we've allowed other folk to take from Utah, particularly New York, to take a story that is unique in the history of military in the United States that we've allowed other people to claim instead of Utah claiming. But if you go up to Fort Douglas, there is a infantry banner up there that says the 24. And that banner, I think, is maybe 3 foot by 4 foot. It's huge. They have it locked up in a glass case up there. If you go up to Fort Douglas, you can see that banner now. That is the banner that was placed on top of San Juan Hill in Cuba. When the Americans took the hill, that is the banner that was planted there. But now the story goes, if you believe the movies and other things, is that Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders came in, they took San Juan Hill, and the Rough Riders planted the flag on the hill. As a matter of fact, when you look at the after-action photograph, they have Teddy Roosevelt in the middle, all the white soldiers around him, and all the black soldiers on the edge. And over time, that picture begins to get small until you've cropped out all of the black soldiers, and then it's just Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. But the men who set that banner on top of the hill there at El County were the black soldiers from Fort Douglas, Utah. So that is a story that we have to reclaim for our state, for our fort, and for our people, because we were literally, the African Americans that were literally the ones who helped take that hill. And even afterwards, when Colonel Roosevelt, Theodore Benjamin Roosevelt, talked about those soldiers, he talked about how great the black soldiers were. But when it came to talking about San Juan Hill, it was a different narrative. And he talked about that the soldiers began to lose their white officers, and they did not know how to operate without the officers. But many of the other white soldiers, whether enlisted or commissioned, actually came out into the newspapers and said, Mr. Roosevelt is telling you the wrong story. The correct story is that their officers, their leadership were killed. They grouped themselves together and they started back up San Juan Hill. And as a matter of fact, one of the officers reported after the battle, when the enemy surrendered, the men who were closest to where those guys surrendered were the soldiers from the Buffalo soldiers from Fort Douglas and other night from Wyoming and Texas and other places like that. But the soldiers who took that hill were uniquely Utah soldiers. So we have to claim that story back for ourselves. And the sad part about the San Juan battle is PTSD. We had the unfortunate problem of those men coming back to Fort Douglas, and they were traumatized. If you ever read any of the descriptions of the Battle of San Juan Hill, you will see that it was pretty horrific. They called it a rain of bullets, and people died around you constantly. And several of those men came back with PTSD. One particular one was Sergeant William Carter. He was up at Fort Douglas, and whenever he was stressed, he would usually pick up his gun and threaten people and shoot up things. So one day, his commanding enlisted officer, which was at the time the highest ranking black man in the United States Navy in the United States Army enlisted at the time, was John Jackson. So Sergeant Jackson went looking for Private Carter, and Private Carter shot and killed his commanding enlisted officer. And once Carter shot Jackson, the rest of the company went looking for Carter, and unfortunately they was forced to shoot Carter. So we have examples of really what war is like in real life for men who are in the military, so that we think about not just how we deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome now, but how it's affected our military men for a long time. I think in World War II they used to call it shell shock. World War I and World War II they used to call it shell shock. But that type of thing happened long before that. Anytime we go into battle and deal with the kind of things that they dealt with, you unfortunately get those kind of stories of the things that happened to these men. And unfortunately, we lost two good servicemen, because William Carter was really highly decorated coming from San Juan, Cuba. He was in Santiago. He was really highly decorated and recognized as a great soldier. But PTSD, unfortunately, made his life difficult. And he served with, again, the highest ranking African-American enlisted man in the United States Army at the time, who was also a decorated soldier. So we lost two great soldiers in one day from post-traumatic stress syndrome. So hopefully we begin to learn better on how to deal with those type of things. But Buffalo soldiers here in Utah, were well recognized and well renowned. They even had a parade for these guys when they came back from San Juan. The city of Salt Lake turned out hundreds and hundreds of people to greet those soldiers back to Fort Douglas. And waiting for them was their chaplain, Alan Collinsworth, the man who sent them out, welcomed them back. And Mr. Allenberg himself served in the United States Army, served in the United States military for 40 years because his first part of his military service was in the United States Navy before he became an Army officer. And he went on to settle a town called Allensworth in Allensworth, California, which is still there today. So they came back to their chaplain, and their chaplain also worked to try to help these men make the adjustment back into regular society coming out of the war. But I wish I can't remember the name of the book right now, but I was reading a book today about the Buffalo Soldiers here in Utah and in other places, and how well recognized and decorated and respected these soldiers were. This one particular soldier here is James Beckwith. He was actually not a Buffalo soldier. He was considered an Army regular. He started his service here in Utah in 1864, and the Native Americans gave him a nickname of Bloody Arm. So apparently James Beckwith was good at using tomahawks and axes. We're not talking about skinning rabbits here. So James Beckwith was very, very skilled at using a tomahawk. So much so that when the Buffalo Soldier companies started going into Fort Duchesne, the Native American leadership really went to the territorial government and said, y'all can't bring those men out here. They were really, really frightened of black soldiers because of the reputation of James Beckwith. He fought in 3 conflicts in the Black Hawk Wars and other conflicts out in Utah Territory and Colorado Territory. So he was pretty well known. He was a trapper up in Cache County. He was the person that helped create that name of Cache County because he was a fur trapper. He would go up and strip those animals of their fur. He would deal caches in the ground, put his furs in there, cover them up with snow, and then after the snow melted, he would take them out to cache and take them down into Salt Lake and other places to sell them. So the Cache Valley literally gets the name Cache Valley because of all of the caches that he would dig with all of the animals that he killed there. And the other very distinctive thing about him is that he actually created the trail through Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California to go into San Bernardino. And it's still to this day called the Beckwith Pass. He set that trail to help people get from out east through Colorado over into California. So he's a very prominent person who came out here to Utah to serve in the military and serve in the territory in so many different ways. So that's one of the other people that we like to claim. Now this particular one are more modern service people. And I really want to introduce these service people to you because they come from a very distinctive group of individuals. They come from a group known in the African American community as the Divine Nine. The Divine Nine are African Americans, fraternities, and sororities that generally started at black universities. When these African Americans went into the first Divine Nine organization was Alpha, which is it's a fraternity that was founded at Cornell. And what these men found is that when they wanted to become part of those fraternities at Cornell, because they was black, they was not allowed. So they simply created their own fraternity, Alpha as in the beginning. So they was the first African American fraternity, a sorority, and I believe they was founded in 1909, if I remember correctly. So since then, there was 8 others created, 4 sororities and 4 other fraternities. Generally, these men and women joined these organizations while they attended college. They are all national and international organizations, meaning they have memberships coming from colleges in the United States, Germany, Africa, and other places in the world. And their primary purpose is community service. My fraternity, which is Omega Psi Phi fraternity, is the largest fraternity here in Utah and is based in Salt Lake City. And we do community events from fundraising to getting school supplies for kids who are returning to school. We provide scholarships for kids who want to get higher education. And we serve in community places like the Boys and Girls Club, things of that nature. So all of these folks at some point attended college and became members of their respective fraternities and sororities. And then many of them went into the military and became officers. So they took the opportunity from the military to be able to contribute to their communities, because they took that leadership training and professional training from the military and have been able to do some great things in the community, from helping from either starting businesses or helping others start businesses, or like myself, start nonprofits and things of that nature to serve the African American community, and for us to serve greater Utah community. So these folks are highly educated people who, from the start of their college careers, understood the importance of community service and providing services to improve the conditions of African Americans in the United States and around the world. And so, as I began to experience these things, I began to understand that a lot that I was taught as a child was not true. Kind of like what Adrienne is saying, that Black folks don't contribute. But once you start digging up the histories of African American service members, that's over 2 million men and women who have served in the United States military since 1770. So a lot have served this country. And there are organizations like Omega Psi Phi fraternity, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, who their entire purpose is to serve the community. So I wanted to make sure that I included them to help folks understand that there are organizations out there other than just the military, where these people are trying to impact our everyday lives and to dispel this myth, this misunderstanding that African Americans don't contribute to the success of the United States, because we do in every way. And the great thing about it, I guess maybe not so great thing about it, they have to do it in conditions that were not favorable, which means they have to do it in conditions where they were not accepted, where they were not expected to do well, and had to first be able to prove that they could do well to allow them to be able to go on to provide other things in the community. And that same drive, and the same determination, the same hard work took place right here in Utah. Whether it was with the Scott-Hill family or some of the other great folks who serve here in Utah. I'm going to slide this banner over here real quick, and hopefully you guys can see this a little bit better. But on here, we have service members, community organizers and educators, writers, celebration queens, Buffalo soldiers. So we know that the narrative that so many people believe that African Americans don't contribute is simply not true. And we hope that by circulating the Veterans Exhibit, you come down and see some of the folks that we talked about here, and come down and learn some of the great things that people have contributed to everyday life in Utah to make Utah a place that it is, make it a great place. Thank you.
Question.
Oh, I was going to hide. Okay.
We've already.
Can I bring Miss Adrienne up here too, just in case y'all have any questions she can answer to? I'm going to put her on the spot. If I got to be on the spot, she can be on the spot too.
On the spot.
Well, we're already getting questions if maybe people didn't know there was someone out there who cared about these stories, who wanted to hear them. So how can they get a hold of you? How can they get involved in this project?
Wow. So again, Samuel Hideki was created, and if I didn't say it, Samuel Hideki is Swahili for tell the story. We want people to start sharing their family history, their family stories, because when we share it with the community, that becomes the narrative, the history of the community. So that's why we say tell the story. And again, we created Tell the Story of Samuel Hideki because the story wasn't being told. It was just simply that so many people, some of these people have been here 80 years, all their life, and say that they know no Black history in Utah. So you can find Samuel Hideki at samuelhideki.org, which is our website. See some of the history that we have posted over there about some of the great people like Mignon Richmond and Delaney Ellis. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter. That's a good thing to say now.
We're not on Twitter.
LinkedIn, we have a page on LinkedIn, so you can find us. We have a list of projects, trust me, that is a mile long, but we can only work on a few of them at a time. So if there's any topic that anybody watching who would like to know whether or not we're doing it now or plan to do it, or who simply want to contribute, whether it's volunteer time to help us do research or do presentations like this, or who simply want to give, to donate, to help us be able to pay for some of the things that we need to pay for in order to get this work done, you can find us there on our website, Facebook, LinkedIn, places like that.
Are you still collecting veteran stories for this?
All the time. So our veterans exhibit is what we call a living exhibit. I think that's the word that Adrienne and I agree, you know, is a living exhibit, meaning if you contact us and want the link to the veterans forum, we'll send you the link where you can go in and complete the histories of your veteran. If you're a veteran yourself, or if you have a family member that's a veteran, they either need to have been born in Utah, served in Utah, or live in Utah to be added to the exhibit. We reposted that link maybe 3 days ago, and we have about 7 new submissions. So we're going to be constantly upgrading or adding to the exhibit. And we also give the community an opportunity to contribute in the ways of, we have coloring sheets for some of the veterans here. So if you bring your children down to the Brigham City Museum, they can do the coloring sheets, put their name on it, and we will add it to the exhibit. They can come in and write a message to a veteran, and we'll add it to the exhibit. They can come down with an original piece of military art that features African American in the art, and we'll add that to the exhibit. So the exhibit is going to be constantly growing, and we want it to continue to grow as much as possible. But we understand we need people to contribute. Don't be shy, and add yourself to the exhibit. Add your uncle, your cousin, your dad, your mama. You know, you can do your whole family like just like But we want people to begin to understand what all veterans look like in the state of Utah. And we know they come in different forms: Black, Hispanic, Native Nation, Asian, so forth. So yeah. Any other questions for us?
Thank you again so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.